Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
It's Dewbs and Co, the show where we'll get into the conversations that I think you might be having at home today. Of course, it was the hotly anticipated PMQs today. Was you watching it? Did you have your popcorn ready? What did you think to it? Well, Boris Johnson admitted that he did have some drinks in his garden on the 20th of May, but not really sure whether or not it was a baying mob, however, is demanding his resignation. So, should he stay or should he go? And smart motorway rollouts have been suspended amid safety concerns. Is that a smart move? And the pesky unvaccinated. IKEA becomes the latest company not to offer those workers their sick pay benefits if they need to self-isolate because of COVID. Do you agree with that? Or, like me, do you think it's wrong? I'll be talking to an employment lawyer to find out how the land lies for the unvaccinated. All of that to come, but first, let's have a look at the news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom. Prince Andrew is now facing a civil sex abuse trial after a US judge dismissed a motion by his lawyers to have the case thrown out. The Duke of York's legal team argued Virginia Giuffre relinquished her rights to sue anyone when she signed an agreement with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein in 2009. Ms. Giuffre claims she was trafficked by Epstein to have sex with the prince when she was 17. The prince denies any wrongdoing. Lisa Bloom, a lawyer who represents the victims of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, says she doesn't expect the case to be settled out of court.
Prince Andrew understands, and certainly his legal team understands, that he's in a lot of trouble now, and they are not going to have him cooperate with the FBI or make any kind of statements. But I think it's important to note that all of these technical arguments that Prince Andrew has raised, first he said he wasn't properly served with a lawsuit. Then he says it should be thrown out because of a prior agreement that he was not even a party to between Virginia Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein, that the court didn't have jurisdiction. I mean, all of these arguments are now rejected. 95% of these cases end in an out-of-court settlement. I've been doing high-profile sexual assault cases for many, many years. That's how almost all of them end. But in this case, I don't see Virginia accepting anything other than an admission that this happened and an apology to her and payment of a significant amount of compensation. And I just don't see him doing that. So I think he's going to continue to fight the case.
Lisa Bloom. Well, the Prime Minister has apologised after admitting he was at a Downing Street drinks party during the first lockdown. Boris Johnson says he believed it was a work event and therefore within the guidelines. During a heated debate in the House of Commons today, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, along with other opposition leaders, were among those calling for his resignation. The 8-year jail term handed to Frankie Smith over the death of her 16-month-old daughter, Star Hobson, has been referred to the Court of Appeal for being unduly lenient. The Attorney-General says the case was tragic and extremely upsetting. A date for the hearing hasn't yet been confirmed. French police have made an arrest in connection with the unsolved murders of a British family in the Alps nearly 10 years ago. Saïd Al-Hili and his wife and her mother were shot dead on a road near Annecy in September 2012. A French cyclist was also killed. The British family's 2 daughters survived the attack. The rollout of smart motorways in England, which uses the hard shoulder as a traffic lane, has been suspended over safety concerns. The Department for Transport says the decision follows several fatal crashes. New smart motorways will be put on hold for at least 5 years until enough data is collected. But the campaigner Claire Mercer, whose husband was killed using one of these roads, told GB News the new proposals just aren't good enough.
They could have easily just flicked a switch and turned the first lane off while they investigate smart motorways for the 25th time in the last 2.5 years. Just pause it. All they've actually promised to do is pause the rollout of new smart motorways, but it's not even all just new smart motorways. It's only ones that aren't substantially completed. So we're still going to have smart motorways opening in the next few years.
Sport, and Novak Djokovic has admitted breaking COVID isolation rules when he met a journalist after testing positive for coronavirus. He said he made an error of judgment, adding he wanted to fulfil the long-standing meeting with the reporter. That comes as the Australian government is considering whether to deport the world number 1 following a row over his visa and his vaccination status. This is GB News. More news as it happens. Now let's get back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks to that, well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock. My panel, William Clouston, Polly Mackenzie and Joanne Nadler. I didn't give any of you your titles there. It was just your names. I'm going to give you, I've got your proper titles. I've got them on a piece of paper. I'm going to revert to my paper and I'm going to give you the titles that you deserve. William, you are the leader of the Social Democratic Party. Polly Mackenzie, Chief Exec of Demos think tank and a former advisor to Nick Clegg. Joanne Nadler, former Tory party spin doctor and author of Too Nice to Be a Tory. It's my party and I'll cry if I want to. There you go. I'm going to be interested in on your thoughts in just a second. I can tell you on the Boris conversation, the parties. Anyway, it's not just about us and our thoughts tonight. It is also about you and yours. You can get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.uk on the email, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. Shall we start, though, with the story that it kind of does keep on giving a little bit, doesn't it? Partygate. Are you sick of talking about it? Are you massively into it? Do you think Boris Johnson should go or do you think he should stay? Today, the Prime Minister, of course, has apologised to MPs and the country for allowing parties to go ahead in the Downing Street garden. He addressed some rather hostile MPs at PMQs earlier. Let's have a little listen.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise. I know that millions of people across this country have made extraordinary sacrifices over the last 18 months. I know the anguish that they have been through, unable to mourn their relatives, unable to live their lives as they want or to do the things they love. And I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules. And though I cannot anticipate the conclusions of the current inquiry, I have learned enough to know that there were things we simply did not get right. And I must take responsibility.
There you go. Well, he says he must take responsibility. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, joins me now. What does that taking responsibility look like, Darren?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? We saw the Prime Minister there doing something he really does not like doing, Michelle, and that is apologising. But in the end, he really had very little choice today, given the many, many questions about this party that took place on May 20th, when the rest of us, frankly, weren't allowed to meet more than one other person outdoors. Now, the Prime Minister is in this kind of difficult, tricky position in which, in having admitted that, he now has to rely quite heavily on what Sue Gray, the senior civil servant that he mentioned there, her investigation, what it will conclude. As for the opposition, unsurprisingly, they're making hay with this. They are suggesting not only are there more questions for the Prime Minister to answer, but that he ultimately, in the end, should resign. Here's the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister's former Health Secretary broke the rules, he resigned. Yes. And the Prime Minister said he was right to do so. Yep. When the Prime Minister's spokesperson laughed about the rules being broken, she resigned. Yeah. And the Prime Minister accepted that resignation. Why does the Prime Minister still think that the rules don't apply to him?
Yeah. And as I say, there are these lots and lots of questions. Today, Downing Street tried to clear up after PMQs that the Prime Minister was not aware of that email from Martin Reynolds that was about bring your own booze, which clearly alluded to the fact that it was not a work event but a social one. Downing Street saying he did not receive or see that email in advance. But why did he bring his wife, for example? Is that something that you do to work event? Also, when did he find out that this was a party? Did he find out in the immediate days afterwards? Was he aware at the time? Or has it just come into his understanding in recent days since this story broke? Because in the end, despite all these questions around the sidelines and the nuances about whether even work events were allowed in the first lockdown, the big question is that 6 weeks ago, Michelle, Boris Johnson told the House of Commons, told us through journalists, that there was no party in Downing Street, that no rules were broken. Today, he stood up in the Commons and said there was a party, and not even that, he was at that party. And that's why it's really, really tricky politics for the Prime Minister. And it's not a surprise that Keir Starmer and Labour continue to put the boot in.
Mr. Speaker, so we've got the Prime Minister attending Downing Street parties, a clear breach of the rules. We've got the Prime Minister putting forward a series of ridiculous denials which he knows are untrue. Yes. A clear breach of the ministerial code. That code says ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation. The party's over, Prime Minister.
There you go, the party's over, Prime Minister, from Keir Starmer. Tonight, we've got Douglas Ross, the leader of the Conservatives in Scotland, calling for the Prime Minister to resign. That is quite significant. It seems likely that most Conservative Scottish MPs will join him in that. That makes it even more difficult for Boris Johnson. I think going forward, the two things that will decide the Prime Minister's fate now are clearly what Sue Gray finds out in her investigation, whether she concludes that she believes what the Prime Minister had to say today, but second of all, whether we've got more damaging allegations to come. It seems almost possible that this has all come from Dominic Cummings, at least these latest allegations. Is it also possible that he's got more allegations up his sleeve? If that is the case, will Conservative MPs be prepared to put up with this drip effect that is clearly doing quite a lot of damage to the governments?
Darren McCaffrey, thanks for that. Joanne Nadler, I just mentioned in your intro there, you wrote a book about being a Tory. It's my party and I'll cry if I want to.
Yes, how often have I felt that title has been appropriate?
Well, I think there's about 12 parties, rumoured parties we're on the list of at the moment. What should happen next?
Well, I mean, I think the Prime Minister's authority, insofar as he has any left, has been draining away rapidly during the course of the afternoon. And Darren, of course, mentioned the Scottish leader calling for his resignation. I believe there's also been 2 Conservative MPs this afternoon in the House of Commons that have come out and called for his resignation. I think in terms of trying to restate some kind of moral authority over the leadership, then quite frankly, it would be the right thing for the Prime Minister to go. But I hesitate slightly in actually saying he should go immediately, because it's not as though these things happen in a vacuum. The question would be how does the Conservative Party manage a swift transition to a new leadership, because they're not taking this decision just about the leader of the Conservative Party. Far more importantly, they're taking this decision about who the Prime Minister should be. And anybody that's observed Conservative leadership campaigns over the years will know that they can be fractious and they can be quite long-winded, and you've got this process that involves having to refer to the party members as well. So I think the Prime Minister will, I think he sort of will be hanging on by his fingertips for the time being, bolstered, if only by the fact that his colleagues probably haven't quite decided the best way to put this into motion now.
William Clouston, you lead a political party. I have to say, my take on all of this is I'm almost becoming fed up of hearing about these parties. I want the focus to be more on how on earth do we kind of get out of some of the restrictions that we've got upon us across the United Kingdom. How on earth do we just start living with COVID? That's where I would like the focus and the conversations to be. However, Darren was mentioning there people like Dominic Cummings. You know, for me, the manipulation that is happening is almost a witch hunt in my mind, aimed at Boris Johnson. It's almost like we're being like a puppet master. Yeah. You've got someone here playing the strings, dictating what we're thinking about, what we're talking about, and what ultimately may be the final outcome for Boris Johnson. And there's a part of me that feels very uncomfortable with that. However, I also recognise, and some people are writing in now, if you're someone whose loved one was forced to die alone, or someone that you couldn't go and see your loved one, you're going to be very angry about this perhaps disregard of the rules that other people had to abide by. The flip side of that is that other people are sending me pictures of beaches and barbecues and all the rest of it, saying, well, everyone was breaking the rules. Where do you sit on all this?
I largely agree with what you've said. You're a very good company. I mean, it's not to say that this isn't important, you know, because the basics of government, rule makers can't be rule breakers. This is important. You know, people were fined at the very time this was happening. It's not important. But I share your frustration, because actually there are many other bigger things. I mean, the Westminster Village and the SW1 and the media loves this. And I was on Ian Dale last night, I probably shouldn't say that, and they talked about it for an hour. And I'm frustrated because there are a lot of other things that are actually, frankly, I mean, you've mentioned the pandemic, the housing crisis. Nothing is being done about that for kids to get affordable housing. You know, the government strategy, the post-Brexit strategy on industrial policy and trade policy is in disarray. They don't really know what they're doing. So I'm frustrated. I don't want to belittle the importance of flagrant breaches like this. It is disgusting, but I want people to think about the real issues and the broader issues. You know, getting economics right or getting industrial policy right actually is far more important than whether a party happened or not. And actually, just finally, you're right to say that basically we're in the late stage of Johnson. Whatever we say, I don't know. It's a matter of time now. It's a bit like holidays; they end before they finish. They're going to get rid of him. I expect they'll let him take a lot of chop this year, because this year is going to be very difficult. So let him take that, and they will get rid of him. But the circle of trust that you have to govern properly has gone. The timing of this, the drip, 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 there'll be more, and that's broken. And I agree with you. It's frustrating.
Polly?
I agree too. This is fundamentally important, but it's important because it impedes those essential processes of government. You know, trust isn't some nice add-on. It's actually fundamental to both the functioning of a cabinet and a political party to decide on a set of choices and secure them through Parliament, through civil society, through our public services. But it's also fundamental in terms of how you hold a society together. You know, and if you hold your government in contempt because government has held you in contempt, you can't actually make decisions about these complex issues, like how do you solve the housing crisis? What do we do about climate change? What do we do about youth unemployment or knife crime or smart motorways? And it's not just because we're distracted and the amount of minutes we spend on these kind of programmes talking about it. It's because it undermines the ability of government to hold us together in collective endeavour. And that's why it is, I think, in the end, right for Boris Johnson to go at some point. Though Joanne is, of course, right, that doesn't necessarily mean we immediately get a perfect, smiling, capable government. Because Boris Johnson, he often promises to reinvent himself. And he gets a new haircut. And that's the relaunch. But what is the plan for how he goes from where he is today, weakened, unliked, sort of surrounded by the rage of his party, to a Prime Minister who can lead us? And I genuinely, I do not see a pathway. And so unless he leaves or the party gets rid of him, what we have is just a drip, drip, drip of month, because it's good for the Conservative Party to let Boris Johnson take the pain of this year, that what we as citizens end up with is nothing happening on the fundamental issues that our country needs to resolve.
I've got to say, you say that people don't like him. I get inundated pretty much every day.
But some people
saying,
like everybody, right?
Boris
Some people even like
bashing.
me.
Yeah, well, and me. Tell me about it.
I think you need
very
some people,
surprising.
of course. You're talking about a majority, right? And so you do statistical samples, you can see that there is now a very substantial minority who don't like him, majority who don't like him. His net approval ratings are very low. But of course, there are plenty of people, including no doubt some members of his immediate family, who like him.
But I think what will be worrying the Conservative Party is that the sell of Boris Johnson was that he was able to appeal to people and to places that perhaps other Conservatives couldn't.
Yes.
And now the polls seem to be indicating that it's exactly amongst those people that his appeal is dropping, and that he's becoming more of a liability.
He is certainly a liability now, but also the thing that the people gave him a lot of slack. There was always an exception. Oh, it's Boris, you know. And some journalists, some individuals get this, and in a way, the public sort of identifies with that person. You can see their humanity, but becomes a serious problem with things like flat denial. You know, he's always had this tendency just to say, well, if I say it's thus, that it changes the reality. It doesn't. In the end, the advantage becomes a disadvantage. It's now useless. He is a liability.
But this is another open goal. I mean, a great deal of this crisis has been created by what appears to have been his own inability to face up to it. He's been extremely evasive about it. And I have to say, you know, if Keir Starmer wasn't able to kind of make a gain against Boris Johnson on this, then, you know, he can't do anything, can he?
Keir Starmer had a drink in Durham on the 1st of May 2021. So then, you know, it's quite difficult for him as well. I mean, you know, he can say that.
But
it's not flagrant. It's of a different order.
It's really quite different.
It's of a different order.
We've barely seen any opposition.
From going out into your garden with 40 people to a, you know, of course.
Bring your own booze.
And that's the thing is, for example, he said today, with hindsight, I realise I should have, in fact, gone out there and sent everyone back into the office.
That didn't make a great deal of sense to me.
That doesn't make any sense. If it's the end of their working day, they're working very hard, he should have sent them home. If, in fact, they were drinking whilst still working because they had work to do, he should have sent them home.
But if
drinking
they're
on the job.
working...
Like it's just ridiculous to suggest that this was him being kind to his staff, to reward them for their hard work. He wasn't being kind. He didn't even pay for their drinks.
Well, I'll tell you something that what this flags to me, and I might get in trouble for saying it, I hope not, but, you know, this was in 2020, May 2020. There were so many unknowns about COVID. There were so many incredible very restrictive rules. We talk about funerals, social distancing. We talk about who can be at births. We talk about who could be at deathbeds. You know, a lot of people were very frightened. These rules were very rigid. There's a part of me that sits there and goes, hang on just a minute. There seemed to be an awful lot of rule breaking among those people that were very close to the data, who actually knew what was going on. And it makes me wonder, was this, I mean, they needed to get mass compliance to rules, I understand that. But then I kind of question, well, how serious was all of this if actually they were happy to break these rules?
Well, I think that's one of the dangers. They all got it. Remember, the Prime Minister nearly died.
That's the thing.
No, I mean, it comes from the top. The reason that why leadership is key to this is that he sets the tone. He must have. I'm not going to believe that he didn't know there was 100 people invited to bring your own booze. It's nonsense. People know it's nonsense. And he can't, the flat denial approach, it's not. It's worn out.
But I'm sympathetic with what you were saying earlier, William, which is that if
these sympathies very brief, because I need to go to a break in a moment.
But basically, if he goes because of a party, then we're paying attention to that. We're paying attention to the fact that he broke the rules rather than looking at whether the rules were the right thing to have implemented in the first place.
Well, I would say that those rules, there were so many inhumane, I don't think we should ever accept, ever again, being told that we cannot be with our dying loved ones. When I look back now, actually, at the rules as they were in 2020, I find it mind-blowing. And I would say never again should we accept those kind of restrictions. But that is just my personal opinion, and I'm sure you've got yours on that. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking about smart motorways, and I'll also be reading out some of your comments about this whole Boris situation. They have been flying in as we've been talking, I can tell you there. Don't go away, I'll see you in just a minute.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Lots of response coming in from you at home about that last topic, about Boris Johnson. Jamie says, do as I say, not as I do. The elite are laughing at us plebs like it's a game, and the plebs are springing to his defence. You honestly could not make this up. Bill says, get over it. It happened over 18 months ago, and there are more important things to deal with. Anthony says, I couldn't care less about Downing Street parties, quite frankly. If anything, it just proves that the whole COVID pandemic and its restrictions are one big pantomime. Paul says people should be careful what they wish for, wanting Boris out, because we could end up with someone like Drakeford or Sturgeon who want us locked down forever. He goes on to say Boris is leading the way to freedom, so we should thank him for that. Well, keep your thoughts coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at gbnews. Now, I'm just going to welcome Polly back because I believe she's got an update in the Prince Andrew case. Polly, good evening.
27 minutes past 6. I'm Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom with your update. And yes, Prince Andrew is now facing a civil sex abuse trial after a US judge today dismissed a motion by his lawyers to have the case thrown out. Let's speak to GB News reporter Ellie Costello, who's outside Windsor Castle for us. Ellie, talk us through what happened today.
Hi, Polly. Well, Judge Kaplan in the Southern Division of New York took just 1 week to come back with this decision, which is a very short time in terms of a civil case. And in a 46-page document, he revealed the reasons why he is not going to dismiss that civil case that was brought by Virginia Giuffre against Prince Andrew. Now, in that civil case, she alleges that she was sexually assaulted by the prince on 3 occasions when she was a teenager. Those are all claims that, of course, Prince Andrew denies. And in the courtroom last week in New York, Judge Kaplan listened as both sides gave their argument. Prince Andrew's lawyers were arguing that the case should be thrown out. They were highlighting to Judge Kaplan that settlement between Jeffrey Epstein and Virginia Giuffre that was made between them in 2009, but was only made public last week. And in that settlement, it revealed that Virginia Giuffre settled for $500,000 with Jeffrey Epstein so that she wouldn't prosecute him or any other potential defendants. And what Prince Andrew's lawyers wanted was for him to be recognised in that category so that he would be protected by that 2009 settlement. That has not happened. Judge Kaplan today, in that 46-page ruling, says that it's too ambiguous, that Prince Andrew is not named in that settlement and therefore he cannot be protected by it. So at this stage, Polly, this is going to proceed to a full civil trial that we could expect between September to December of this year.
Ellie, we know you're outside Windsor Castle where the Queen is in residence. We've heard that Prince Andrew is her favourite son, her second son. This a big setback for the royal family tonight.
It's a very, very difficult time for the royal family in what is the Queen's Jubilee year, and it has been such a difficult year for the Queen. She is 95 years old. She's lost her husband this year. She has her own ill health that was reported a lot before Christmas, and speaking to people outside the castle, a lot of thoughts are with the Queen and indeed the Duke's 2 daughters as well, who now have young children of their own. It's a very, very difficult time for the royal family, and indeed the worst thing that could happen to Prince Andrew and his lawyers. They were hoping that Ghislaine Maxwell would be found not guilty last week. They were then hoping that Virginia Giuffre's civil case would be thrown out this week. Neither has happened, and now it looks as though Prince Andrew could be facing a full civil trial, which could see him making a statement under oath, which is all very embarrassing for himself and indeed the royal family.
Ellie Costello, outside Windsor Castle in Berkshire. Thanks very much indeed for that update. And one just last footnote for you. Virginia Giuffre's lawyers have said she is pleased she can now take Prince Andrew to court. So reaction from Virginia Giuffre herself through her lawyers. She is pleased she can take Prince Andrew to court. You're with GB News. I'll have more news for you top of the hour. Now back to Michelle and Dewbs & Co.
Hi, thanks for that, Polly. Well, today the government announced that they're going to pause the new rollouts of smart motorways until 5 years' worth of safety data has been collected. For those of you that don't know what a smart motorway is, it basically uses technology to regulate traffic flow and tell drivers whether or not you can use the hard shoulder. There are around 375 miles of smart motorway in England, but there have been concerns about safety, especially on sections without a hard shoulder. A campaigner, Claire Mercer, whose husband Jason died on a smart motorway near Sheffield, has called for the developments to be stopped altogether. Let's listen to what she was saying on Breakfast this morning.
They had to stop, so they did, where they thought was safer. I don't know if they knew that they were right by a gantry, and if they actually thought that might help them pick them up easier or whatever, but it certainly didn't. It didn't acknowledge them. It didn't close the lane. They got out their vehicles. They were checking their vehicles, swapping details, and a lorry that should have been in an entirely separate lane on a normal motorway ploughed into them and killed them instantly.
Polly Mackenzie, what's your view on smart motorways?
Well, it's devastating to hear the story of both that crash and those others that have been sort of exposed during this debate. It's not clear whether they are safer, as some argue, less safe, or that we just don't have the data. So I think it is the right call to delay the rollout until proper data can be collected. You know, road safety is, extremely kind of complicated to work out. But I think there's actually a wider lesson for us. If you think about the pandemic, the sense that we were running our hospitals with no kind of redundancy, no spare capacity. And in a way, a hard shoulder it's like a kind of the vacant ward or the vacant ICU beds. It's redundancy in the system, and it's there for a crisis. It's there for the broken down vehicle, just as, the spare beds are there for patients in a crisis. I think for a really long time, we've assumed that it's okay to kind of run all of your public services, including the roads, in a kind of just-in-time basis with no spare capacity. And you absolutely must use up every last thing in the name, of course, of efficiency and value for money. And I think what we've learned, and it's obviously really obvious there in this motorways debate, is that actually having spare capacity, having redundancy, which costs more money, which we then have to find a way to pay for through economic growth, through our tax system, it is worth doing. And so I think we need to take that thought into kind of public service development, to think about what does resilience look like? What does your ability to respond in an emergency look like? And the reality is, just like hard shoulders, it's expensive. Get-arounds to extending motorways, trying to kind of just do it on the cheap instead of, all of the effort of laying the concrete, the tarmac, it's really, really high risk.
William, I've got to say, I do a fair bit of motorway driving, as I'm sure many of us do, and I quite like the comfort of knowing that there is a permanent hard shoulder. Although I have to say, having had to pull over onto one of them, they're terrifying when you're on the side of an actual hard shoulder, especially when it's raining, and they are terrifying places to be, if you ask me. But nonetheless, I like the kind of sentiment that they're there. What's your view? Should we have smart motorways? Good thing, bad thing?
I can understand why transport planners put them into action. I can understand why they tried it, to take Polly's point. But I have huge sympathy with the campaigners on this. I really do. I think it's a correct decision. I'm with the Commons Committee that said, just halt it and have a look. For me, I think a hard shoulder is part of the definition of a motorway. A dual carriageway doesn't have a hard shoulder, a motorway does. So this idea that you can have, it almost sort of breaches the definition of what a motorway is. Most people, if you ask them, do motorways have hard shoulders, they would say yes. So I think what they've done is they've sacrificed understanding and simplicity. I mean, they're talking about dynamic situations where they're chopping and changing with X's across, the lanes and things. It's actually, I think, to me, as a motorist, I would say that just invites confusion. And remember, anyway, that a proper hard shoulder is quite a dangerous place. And I would advise anyone at all that breaks down, if you break down on a motorway, a proper motorway with a hard shoulder, get away from your car. Don't be in the car, because plenty of people have lost their lives on the hard shoulder anyway. So I've got huge sympathy with these campaigners.
One of the probably most useful things I've ever learned, and I learned it on a speed awareness course, I must be honest there, was if you ever end up in a hard shoulder or anything, to turn your wheels kind of away from the road, so that if you do get kind of shunted from behind, you don't kind of go this way or that way, you'll be pushed that way. I found that fascinating on this speed awareness course that I did, I have to say. Anyway, Joanne, the flip side to this would be, people would be saying, well, life's moved on when it comes to cars. They don't just tend to break down where they are anymore. You can more often than not get to a safe place, so then why do you need them?
I mean, I've heard that argument made, particularly during the course of the day. And from the point of view just of a driver, just of a motorist with no particular technical understanding of these things, I have to say the idea of a motorway without a hard shoulder sort of just doesn't pass the smell test as far as I'm concerned. It seems to me to be another example of what we might consider to be sort of a common sense reaction to something, and a very technocratic approach on behalf of specialists. And they haven't made a strong enough case in favour of these things yet, I don't think.
Well, there you go. That's our thoughts. Ervin's been in contact saying it's great the government creating smart motorways. The flaw in the plan, though, is there's not enough smart drivers to use them. I hear what you're saying there. And also, by the way, if the government is so concerned about making sure that all lanes are used, why are so many people, so many places so lax in terms of roadworks? And why aren't you doing 24/7 roadworks then on motorway lanes to make sure that they're all open as quickly as possible? There you go. That's a thought for you. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the unvaccinated, particularly when it comes to the workplace, whether it's sick pay when you're forced to isolate, or kind of what I would call a coercion for people to have them. Otherwise, they lose their jobs. I'll be talking to an employment lawyer about how the land lies for the unvaccinated. I'll see you in a second.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Now, IKEA and Wessex Water have become the latest companies to announce plans to cut sick pay for the unvaccinated UK staff who need to self-isolate. This comes after supermarket chain Morrisons announced last year that it would cut sick pay for the unvaccinated too. But, you know, these companies, they're not alone, and according to a survey of over 200 companies, 10% were considering adjusting their sick pay policy for unvaccinated staff isolating as well. And if you ask me, I think you'll see a few more of them. But I wonder, when it comes to the unvaccinated, how can an employer treat somebody differently based just on what they have or haven't had injected into them? Now, to help me understand the kind of legalities of this, I'm delighted to be joined by Francis Hoare, barrister, employment lawyer extraordinaire, and you're also doing a lot of work when it comes to the whole kind of unvaccinated people in the workplace, aren't you? Help me understand, if you will, help my viewers understand. An employer, they offer their employees a contract of employment, and within that will state various different things, including sick pay entitlement, more often than not. Of course, we have something statutory sick pay, but often employees will have enhanced sick pay benefits as well, and it's that we seem to be talking about at the moment. Can you help us understand the legal position? Can an employer treat an unvaccinated person differently to a vaccinated one?
So the employer can only vary the employment contract unilaterally if that's allowed by the employment contract itself. So let's presume it was. Let's presume the Morrisons and IKEA employment contracts with their workers say you can the employer can unilaterally amend the employment contract. That has to be a reasonable decision. And it's only lawful if it's reasonable. And the factors to consider whether it's reasonable or not are whether or not it does anything that is necessary or proportionate for the employer. In this case, we're talking about people who are isolating and being required to isolate. So you're not saying, even if it was true, and even if there was good evidence to say that the vaccine stopped transmission or it massively reduced it, even if there was that good evidence, it doesn't do that because that person's is isolating anyway. So first of all, it doesn't have a good purpose. Secondly, it clearly goes against bodily integrity, protected by Article 8 of the ECHR. It's not a public body, so it doesn't have to follow that as rigorously as a public body, but it's still relevant consideration. And thirdly, it's indirectly discriminatory against anyone who doesn't have the vaccine for a particular reason connected to their protected characteristics, or if it disproportionately affects people with a particular protected characteristic. For example, far more black people than white people don't have the vaccine, so it disproportionately affects them, and therefore they have to justify it. The employer would have to justify what they've decided to do by showing it was proportionate.
See, I'm getting the impression from you there, and this is my interpretation of what you've just said, that some of these employers could find themselves on a bit of a sticky wicket because if I was in this situation, if I wasn't vaccinated and I had to isolate, and by the way, I think the rules of the unvaccinated having to have different isolation rules to the vaccinated, I think they're nonsensical, but that's just my opinion. But if I was one of those people, first and foremost, I would feel very uncomfortable having to tell my employer what my medical status is. So I would even roll it back before then and ask, can an employer demand to know whether or not you've been injected with something?
And again, that's another consideration. There may be circumstances where it's proportionate for an employer to demand that, but where you don't have that ability as an employer to ask that question in the contractual terms the employee agreed to, unilaterally varying the contract to require that person to give their personal medical information is an extremely onerous step. You're absolutely right.
And my final question, I guess, to you is, to me, this feels like a form of coercion, an employer almost coercing an employee to have 1, 2, 3, whatever the number is, of vaccinations. And this is what I've always, every single time I cover this topic, this is the point I come back to. I do not like the thought and the concept of anyone being coerced to have something injected into them, particularly not for their job. And I wonder legally, if an employee says, right, you know what, fair enough, I'm the sole breadwinner, I have to receive this money if I'm going to have to isolate, etc., so therefore I will get vaccinated. And then they go on to have side effects because of the vaccine, however rare. I'm not talking about how rare they are, I'm talking about if you are affected. Can an employee then go to an employer and say, well, I've had this vaccine in order to keep my job or in order to receive the pay, and now I've got side effects and you're liable?
And in the context where you can't sue the vaccine manufacturer because these are given authorization under an emergency procedure, effectively an emergency procedure, which means that you can't sue the vaccine manufacturer as a result of side effects. They are exposing themselves to the risk of side effects, however low that risk level might be, solely because they are being coerced. So yes, it would be challenging to bring a personal injury case against an employer, but it certainly might be arguable, and it's certainly something that IKEA and Morrisons and other employers should think about, and their lawyers should be advising them about.
William Clouston, what's your view on all this?
I like the way this conversation was going, because I think it's almost impudent, actually, for an employer like a supermarket or a seller of furniture or even Wessex Water to demand that information for employees. I mean, that's the first hurdle they have to get over. Why should an employee say whether they're vaccinated or not?
But I guess the trick would come down to the rules as they stand at the moment are that if you're not vaccinated and you come into close contact with someone that's a positive case, you have to isolate.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
So then you're going to have to tell your boss, look, I have to stay home for this reason.
But the IKEA as a boss are penalising people who are declaring to IKEA, otherwise they wouldn't be able to penalise them, and giving them less sick pay. That to me, that's wrong. I think I'm not, as a party, we haven't, all of this stuff is very, very difficult. In this domain, I think it's completely wrong. I think in the case of during Delta and for NHS workers and for care workers, I think care workers have a duty of care. And I think if doctors come into close contact, day-to-day, face-to-face, with people who are vulnerable, people with leukemia, people, the frail elderly, and others, then I think it's reasonable for the NHS to demand that they are vaccinated. And I think it's a domain thing. But for a seller of furniture or cornflakes to say, right, you as an employee have to tell me, well, it's completely unreasonable.
I mean, I've got to say, William, on the NHS and the care workers, I would push and say, what about natural immunity? What about there's that very well-documented case of the doctor who challenged Sajid Javid and explained that he had caught COVID and therefore didn't feel that he needed the vaccine. So that's perhaps another conversation for another day. But I would always push back to what you've said and ask about natural immunity. But Joanne Nadler, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's wholly discriminatory, and I agree with what we've heard already, that it just, apart from anything else, it seems completely inappropriate for these types of employers to be demanding this kind of information about their, certainly about their existing employees, but also potentially, it seems to me, about any future employees. I mean, it just seems to fly in the face of all our, basic civil rights, it seems to me. So I find it quite a staggering proposal, even setting aside any of the practical considerations about it.
Polly?
I think these employers are motivated by a sort of resentment of having to pick up the tab for people taking more time off work because of personal choices that they have made around vaccination. But I think there's a real danger with COVID, because it's new and different and awful, that we end up making laws or rules for that you wouldn't want in a just society for anything else. So one of my employees at Demos broke his leg playing football at the weekend, and he took some time off to get his leg repaired, and it impaired his performance at work because he had to hobble around a lot. But that, if he hadn't have played football, it wouldn't have happened. And yet, part of my responsibility is the complexity of human life. If I go out and, I don't know, have unprotected sex and catch hepatitis, I might end up with a chronic illness that impairs my performance at work. Should therefore my employer worry about whether I have protected or unprotected sex? You have to just accept that people are complicated. People make choices in their personal lives that then have impacts on their availability, their health, or all sorts of stuff around the workplace. And just because COVID is this new thing and vaccination is a new thing, I think there's a real danger of employers just getting into a complete jumble about Polly, not just accepting that people make those choices.
I can see the justification in the NHS.
As can I.
I really can.
But that's on one specific communicable disease. Doing this, and that's about mandating it. Doing this like differential sick pay thing.
It's disgraceful. It's disgraceful.
It's disgraceful. It's immoral. But it's also, I think, just creates all of the wrong incentives for your employees to basically lie to you in a system that is not enforced. If you decide not to isolate, nobody checks up on you. We know that. So if you're an IKEA employee and you're not entitled to the sick pay, don't tell your employer that you caught it and turn up to work anyway.
It is legal to not be vaccinated.
Yes.
So what authority?
It's stupid.
What authority do IKEA or Morrison's have in this regard? It seems a complete overstatement of their role. And I would just suggest that we just go and boycott both of those two brands.
Not about it.
One of my viewers, Jason, has been in touch saying, I believe that employers should be able to discriminate against unvaccinated staff, because if, for example, an employee caught COVID at work and died, then I'm sure a lawsuit would follow based on the fact that they weren't protected sufficiently by the employer. But Jason, two things to what we're saying here. Number one, you can still contract and transmit COVID if you're vaccinated. And number two, this person is going to be at home because they have to isolate. They're not even going to be in your workplace. What we're talking about here is organisations who are refusing to pay the enhanced sickness benefit for those people whilst they're self-isolating. Francis, lots of people are getting in contact that work in the care sector now and saying that they have it hanging over them that they're about to lose their job, and they're writing and asking me if I can ask you, what should they do? They're getting letters saying that they have to disclose their vaccination status imminently and they look likely to lose their job. What advice can you give to those viewers?
Well, the slightly tricky thing is that I'm involved and possibly will be instructed in a judicial review of that policy, so I'm not going to comment on that policy directly. But what they can certainly do is say that that policy is likely to be challenged, and unless and until we get to the end of March and that legislation hasn't been overturned by the courts, then there is no requirement for them to have the first jab or the second jab. It's only if this comes into force that the employer, that is to say the NHS or anyone else, has to require them not to have been jabbed. Just one other quick point on that point of being sued if somebody gets COVID in a shop. There is not a single example in any common law country, as far as I am aware, of anyone being able to sue somebody because they contracted a respiratory virus. Respiratory viruses are something that we have lived with as human beings for at least 10,000 years since the dawn of agriculture.
You can never prove it.
You can never prove it. It's utterly impossible to prove where you contracted it. So it's farcical to think that you could sue anyone because you contracted a virus. I think we were going to supermarkets every day in the middle of the lockdown, and the supermarket workers had no higher fatality rate than anyone else.
But
what does that tell you?
Could also have contracted it from somebody who was vaccinated.
Absolutely.
There's also one very interesting thing which we're not talking about enough is that the actual Delta variant is different from Omicron, and actually the effectiveness of vaccines against Omicron changes it slightly. I'm going to make a little prediction now. Come the 1st of April, I'm not sure they'll implement the mandate even in the NHS because the data is different.
Well, we're
looking
see.
at the policy.
But Francis, just before I do move on, it's almost the end of my show anyway, but just before I do move on, people are saying that they are being asked this week to disclose their vaccination status to their employers. And people are writing and asking me this as well, what do they do if their employer now is saying, I want to know your vaccination status? Do they have to comply if they don't want to? I mean, if you want to, so what? Do what you want. I'm talking about people that don't want to do that.
Well, they should ask the employer to point to the contractual term that entitles that employer to require them to give any personal medical information.
But then the employer might say, well, we're preparing ourselves for the mandate that's coming in on the 1st of April, so we're just trying to do a risk assessment based on our workload, our workforce.
Well, again, a risk assessment that can only require an employee to give that information if there is a contractual term requiring that employee to comply with it.
Well, there you go. I hope that's been helpful to some of you. Now, almost time for us to finish. If you're fed up of all this COVID malarkey, or I don't know, the whole cost of living that's about to go through the roof, isn't it? You might want to take a leaf out of this lady's book, self-employed writer Lindsay Banks. She made the switch from expensive living last June and has since slashed her bills from in excess of £1,000 a month to just £250. I love this story. She basically sold everything that she owned, got a big kind of motorhome, caravan type thing, and just went off grid. So if indeed everything all gets too much, never say never, get yourself a caravan, and you'll save yourself a fortune, and you might even be left alone. Oh, chance would be a fun thing, wouldn't it? Anyway, that's all I've got time for. Thank you very much for your company, whether you're watching or listening. We very much appreciate it. And to my panel, William Clouston, Polly Mackenzie, Joanne Nadler, and Francis Hoare for joining us at the end. That is all from me for tonight. I'll be back exactly the same time tomorrow, 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock. If there's anything that you want us to cover on Dewbs & Co, get in touch. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. Have yourself a good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello, getting cold out there now. The sun has gone down. We'll keep largely clear skies across the south, but it will turn foggy in places, but also a frost likely across the south first thing in the morning, thanks to high pressure. Further north, notice quite a few isobars on the chart. It's been a windy day across northern Scotland. It stays windy here overnight, and that breeze will help to prevent a frost and will continue to bring quite a lot of cloud across certainly western Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. Elsewhere though, clear skies, and especially in the south with the light winds, turning cold here. Frost likely even in towns and cities. We'll get down a touch below freezing, and a few dense fog patches, which this time of year are hard to shift, so certainly be around for the rush hour and could stick around even into the afternoon in a few locations. We'll keep thicker clouds across the northwest of Scotland, patchy rain over the Highlands and the Western Isles, stays pretty blustery in the far north as well. But elsewhere, the winds are light and for many, a bright day with sunny spells and temperatures picking up to 7-8 degrees Celsius, maybe 10 in the southwest. Again, the highest temperatures likely over northern Scotland, 10, 11, maybe 12 in Aberdeenshire. Stays quite breezy here through the course of Thursday evening. We'll see a bit more rain heading into the Northern Isles. Again, most places dry. And again, where we've got the clear skies, we'll see that double threat of frost and fog. If anything, probably more fog as we head into Friday morning. And again, it could stick around, certainly through into the late morning, perhaps even all day in a few locations. But if you don't get the fog, you should generally have another sunny day, the main exception being that patchy rain across the far north of Scotland. Generally, temperatures a little lower on Friday, and especially if the fog sticks, we may struggle to get much above 2 or 3 Celsius. But generally, the outlook is pretty dry, some sunshine, some dense fog patches, and particularly in the south, frosty conditions in the mornings. Bye for now.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.